Have you ever imagined a world, well, fill in the blank. SparkHub is about making dreams happen when life throws major curveballs at you. It's my hope that any time you listen to an episode, something will spark inside of you, and even if no one listens, but I leave some kind of legacy time capsule behind for my children that may even spark them to imagine their own great world after I'm gone, well, that's good enough for me. Below each episode are crucial show notes, and please support us by visiting thesparkhub.com. Now, let's begin. My name is Alan, and I have a heck of a story for you. Some of you may have heard a solo episode I created around navigating a do-it-yourself divorce, so in short, a survey of one. But over what now turned out to be 3 episodes, I had a conversation to seek a female point of view on the topic from my long-term friend, Syreeta Fonso. Now, Syreeta and I have been friends for over 30 years, first meeting and working together in Australia a very long time ago. And we've been friends for so long because we have a lot in common, and we sometimes seem to be leading parallel lives. Both of us ended up leaving our native countries to seek adventure in the United Kingdom, high-flying careers in London. We both got married, we both had 2 kids of similar age, and as it turns out, personality traits, and we're both divorced. So throughout my divorce, Syreeta's been a pillar of support for me. She's given me a lot of perspective and empathy, and we've probably shared hundreds of hours of voice notes, helping each other look at things from different perspectives. We decided our conversations might actually help others, so we recorded the conversation you're about to listen to, but I split it into 3 angles, which I explored before. So divorce with kids, but through 3 lenses: an emotional lens, a financial lens, and a legal lens. So full caveat, whatever your situation, please always seek legal and financial advice if you're about to go through or are going through a divorce. What follows is only a conversation intended to spark some consideration or some thoughts based on our experiences and things we kind of wish we knew at the time. So welcome to part 1 of 3, which is the emotional lens. Well, hello, my friend. We're back under different circumstances now. We did a SparkHub podcast under very different circumstances, but now, sadly, it's about divorce, isn't it?
Oh, yes, that old chestnut.
And surviving it. So I guess where I'd love to start is, you and I have been friends for 2 decades now?
Yeah, it is.
It's been that long?
It has.
My God. And I think, we have a lot in common. Personality-wise, I think we're both from outside the UK. You're from Australia, I'm from Canada, but we met in Australia. I've been friends ever since. And, we've both been through a divorce, which has a lot of similarities, and we both have kids of similar personalities and ages. So I think today I just wanted to catch up with you and talk to you about what I'm going through, but what also you're going through, and I guess get a perspective. Because so far I'm SparkHub, I've mostly done solo stuff, and I think it'd be good to have a female point of view.
I'm happy to provide that.
So I guess, ladies first, but give me a brief overview of your story. Once you came to the UK, what was your expectation of the UK? What actually happened? How did you end up where we ended up now?
Wow, well, gosh.
The short version too.
The short version. I'll try and be as brief as possible. So, I came to the UK 23 years ago. So I guess you could say that I've spent half my life in the UK now.
Then we must have been friends for longer than 20 years.
I think we have.
Well,
yeah.
You were 19, I was 20, so wow, it's been 28
yeah.
years? Are we pushing 30 years?
Yeah, well, I think we are.
Wow. All right, 23 years ago, you come to the big smoke with big dreams, right?
Yes, big dreams, a big suitcase full of shoes, an empty bank account, and hope on the horizon. But yeah, I came to the UK basically just because I wanted an adventure, but I wanted a work adventure. I wanted a career adventure. That was what was guiding me, and I think I definitely managed to have that. So I arrived in the UK, and then over the next kind of 10 years or so, just established myself working for lots of different great brands in media, primarily in the communications world and in TV. So I loved that. And then I met my now ex-husband probably about 10 or 12 years into my stay in the UK.
And he's from overseas as well, isn't
he?
He
is, so, yeah. He's from Cameroon, but grew up in the UK.
Okay.
And was educated in the UK and Italy. And we met, hit it off, and Had got married and had a family. Our first child was born in 2011, and then we had a second child in 2015. So the kids now are 13 and 9.
Well, mine are 12 and 9, so yeah, around the same years. Incredible.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, through it all, I continued working until we moved outside of London, and I was pregnant with our second daughter, and it came time that it just made sense for me to give up work then. Commuting distance was too far. It didn't make sense financially. And I was comfortable with the decision at the time. It made sense for everyone, for all round. And we were financially comfortable enough to make it work.
Did you think you were taking a break or a permanent step back?
I did think I was taking a break.
Yeah.
I did think I was taking a break. I had dreams of returning to corporate life. I loved working in the Big Smoke in London. I loved the pace of it, the beat of it, all of that. The ambition, the drive, the fluidity of it. I loved it.
But let's not pull punches. You had some pretty high-profile, high-paying roles. Are we able to name the brands you worked at?
Yeah. I mean, I worked for several years, sort of 6 or 7 years at MTV, and had an international role where I traveled a lot. At some years in that 6 or 7 year stint, I was traveling for a week out of every month, and it was fantastic, really fantastic. And at the time, I didn't have family commitments either, so you're able to do that. You've only got yourself to worry about.
I can reminisce. Everything you're saying is a parallel to my situation and my ex as well, who finally got a role that was international and deserving of her talent and paying well. So we were like you, dinks, double income, no kids, high flying life. And then the kids came along, and like you said, the decision was to stay home. And I think we went through the same. I think every couple has to have that conversation, but if there's enough money in the pot and you have that option, it's nice to have, isn't it?
Yeah, it's nice to have. And I think at the same time, I think working in a high profile role, a stressful role that demands a lot of you, you do get tired. You get tired, and you welcome, as a woman anyway, you get to a point where you welcome the natural break that having children offers. And you start to think, actually, is this signaling the right moment for me to take a step out of this for now, take a step out of the rat race, focus on something different. And also, I think, I feel like I had children fairly late in life as well.
Same for us. I mean, we're talking mid-30s in terms of of starting a family, which, just as a quick note, my parents did in the 70s. My mum was 34 when she had me and 37 when she had my brother. And in that generation, that was considered ancient. But for us, our generation, we work and play hard.
Yeah, absolutely.
But it sounds like everything you are talking about is, we keep talking about it because we have the similar experiences. You're trying to balance everything. But I think, just to cut in today's topic, is obviously now we're sitting here divorced with 2 kids and similar situations, but there's always three lenses, isn't there, when you're going through this? The first is emotional, the second is financial, and the third is legal. But I suppose if we start with emotional, you think about that roller coaster you had working MTV, CNN, all these high profile roles, then coming home to people who may not be grateful for your presence, but you're grateful for theirs, shall we say. And then going through that roller coaster. And so how did it emotionally, what did you have to go through when you decided the marriage was done? Because who initiated the...
Well, I think the first step it took was it took an admission on both of our parts that neither of us were happy. And that was a very, very difficult thing, difficult conversation to have. I think we had been trying for a long time to get things to kind of reignite something that I think we both felt had dwindled between us. And I think there was a discrepancy in our emotional timelines. And I think that is what caused the greatest amount of friction when it came to identifying the kind of, the trajectory of where we were going to go next, basically. And it's funny because someone, I think it may have been a therapist actually, was describing to me that in many marriage breakdowns between a couple, there's a pinch point and a crunch point. And the pinch point is, she described it as, it's the point where you are both so emotionally squeezed and you're both feeling it, and it's very difficult. And at the pinch point, you can decide what you want to do. There's options for both of you. There's options. You can carry on and seek help. You can work together to try and work it out, or you can go the other way and kind of, pull the pin on it. The crunch point is when it's irreparably broken. And she described to me that the issue in a lot of marriage breakdowns is that the two people are at different points in that trajectory. You may get one party at pinch point, so it's still salvageable if there's communication and talking, yet the other party is already at crunch point, and so they're ready to pull the pin. And those are the situations where there's the greatest amount of upset and tension, when it's finally acknowledged that the marriage is irreparably broken and they decide to separate. So I think I would describe my situation as very similar to that. I was at crunch point, my ex was at pinch point, and I think by the time we had the conversation where we admitted that we were both deeply unhappy, I think that fissure
was too big.
Yeah, it was too big.
Interestingly, I've spoken to a lot of men and women, and not to generalize, and this might be a survey of less than a dozen, but there's a commonality, what I've noticed in the two genders. And one is the men think it can always be fixed. So men think we can fix anything, including marriage, which might be, well, on one hand optimistic, but on the other hand unrealistic. And the other side is that, I've read and heard that women can mentally and emotionally break up with you a long time before the man sees it coming. And I know every man I know that's been through a divorce, we all said the same thing: we didn't see it coming, or we saw it coming, but we thought there were several barriers before the nuclear option.
Yeah.
And so I'll put myself in the camp of was obvious but didn't see it coming. But I found that in my circumstances, and again, this is only my opinion, this doesn't represent my ex's opinion, but I found the circumstances were that we just never had time to even reconnect. And just a couple quick stories. There was one psychologist who said in marriages, it's similar to your pinch point, crunch point, but it's more around how many positive to negative interactions do you have a day?
Yeah.
And so I can imagine if, in your case, you were staying home with two demanding children and the man's out to work, as I was, as your ex was, you know what it's like to be in a high-profile, high-pressure job, to pay for this lifestyle. And you come home on the train, maybe you've had your elbows up, you've missed bath time because the trains are not running. So there's years and years of that compounding mess. You maybe, if you're lucky, you'll fall asleep together watching Netflix, if you're lucky. But usually you won't, and the kids won't go to bed. And so you think of that, and I just kept thinking, okay, there'll become a moment where this will break. And to your point, I was like, okay, it's a pinch point. We'll overcome it. But I wasn't taking stock of the emotional crash points that my ex was going through. And again, mea culpa. But if you think back, I think back to how many times do we say something positive to each other versus negative? The garbage is not done. The dishes are piling up. And I'm not saying in either direction, but just stuff didn't get done, and it wasn't anyone's fault. It's just that you're torn between working, spending time with the kids, and clearing a big house, because both of us had big houses. Multi-bedroom houses, and the amount of admin that takes if you don't have domestic help. But anyway, I was always on the side that, in hindsight, I think the ratio is if you have 5 negative to 1 positive, and that then becomes a pattern and leads to contempt. As soon as it gets to contempt, it's game over. Yeah. If you are contemptuous of each other. And it could be, I suppose, if I look back in hindsight, it's a wonderful thing. Contempt, yes, but I wasn't contemptuous of my ex. I was contemptuous of the time I'd lost. I was contemptuous of the fact that I was working so hard to make sure that the bills were paid, but there was never any gratitude for it. Not that there should be, but even once in a while, a kind word wouldn't have gone astray. But at the same time, maybe I wasn't providing the kind words because it was always a functional exchange, and you suddenly become roommates. Why the socks out? It's not when's our next date night. And then I think compounding that is you and I are both from overseas.
Mm-hmm.
We don't have a family network here. And so if you don't have a network on one side of or you have one partner that has a network and one that doesn't, you're not with your tribe. And I think that cultural differences can suddenly flare up, or you feel, I certainly felt my parents didn't get to exposure to their grandkids as much as I thought they would. And it just all snowballs, doesn't it?
Yeah,
so
it does.
In my view, and again, circling back to your point, I'm thinking as a man here, we can fix this, and it's a pinch point, but certainly I can respect now in hindsight that emotionally it must have been tough to be in a crunch point. And then
yeah, it definitely was. I mean, I think it's one of those things that, I mean, we went through the motions of, I went through the motions actually of trying to push for counselling. My ex wasn't interested in counselling, and finally I was able to convince him to have a handful of sessions. So we tried therapy, and that process was driven by me. My ex wasn't particularly interested in trying therapy, and I think it was only marginally successful. We probably had half a dozen sessions, and I think that really those sessions happened after the horse had already bolted. So it
was moot almost in many ways. And
it was moot. It was an entirely uncomfortable situation. And I think in my own mind I suspected that it might be like that anyway, not because I don't believe in therapy, because I do, but more because I felt that I was dragging someone through the process against their will.
So two of you weren't on the same.
I didn't have his buy-in for the therapy in the first place.
So he was almost felt like a hostage, potentially.
Yeah, it was.
You know what? As I look back, I really believe in therapy, and I think what I'm envious of is that, one, he got the opportunity, and number two, you guys had the time.
Yeah, we did have the time, and we had the opportunity. I forced the issue, and I think, in hindsight, I do wonder whether in my own timelined mind, I kind of was thinking to myself, there's one last box to tick, and we haven't ticked this therapy box.
Oh, I see.
And I feel that somebody impartial might just be able to help us through this. We need somebody who's almost like a helicopter, who doesn't have a foot in the situation, who's able to kind of help us make sense of this. And I'm not sure whether I was in therapy to save things or in therapy to make sense of the situation. But either way, I felt that the process was going to be useful for both of us, both myself and my ex.
You know what I thought to myself, if we did go to therapy, which sadly we didn't, and again, I'm not blaming anyone, it didn't happen for us, but I felt the same. I said, even if it didn't work out, we'd probably come away with a better understanding of who we were, a better way to frame things, new vocabulary, and potentially could be friends from it, and potentially could even set you up for your next relationship, because you'd go in with a few insights that might prevent you ending up back in therapy for the wrong reasons. Because I do think therapy can be preventative too. I know couples that do it, even though they're happy couples, they do it because it's a safe space for both of them, and they can. But as you say, both have to be willing and both have to put in. It's like data. It's crap in, crap out. And I'm sorry to hear that you didn't have buy-in, but at the end, I guess by default, it flipped to, I just want to try everything. And I wish I'd had that opportunity. And in hindsight, maybe I should have pushed for it. But again, dynamics being as they were, here we are. And I suppose just to jump to another emotional point, I think the other thing I learned is if you think of an airplane flying through the sky, this is how someone described it to me, and you have to get to your destination, every 60 seconds the plane has to recalibrate which direction it's flying, because if you're off by a smidge, the compounding issue of the plane being off course, you'll end up on the other side of the planet, you'll out of fuel, crashing into the ocean. And it says the same for marriage. If you're not constantly recalibrating, I was told 90 minutes a week by one therapist, if you don't sit down and talk about your finances and your plans, and then suddenly you're just two planes in the sky with no destination, and you add kids to that. it's even tougher. But it's a good analogy, and I look back at it now and go, yeah, we were probably way off for a lot longer than I thought.
Well, that's the thing, is that I think it's so difficult in this day and age, to when everyone is so busy and we're so time crunched, to think of therapy for maintenance in marriages. But essentially that's what you're saying, is that, you know, to be in a healthy marriage and relationship with longevity and you know, all of the good stuff, therapy for maintenance is the ideal. That's the optimum, isn't it? Because then you can kind of help each other
do those, stay on course.
Mid-course corrections is where it's at.
I mean, date night's one thing. I know it sounds silly, but even if you had 90 minutes a week that was rock solid and you sat and let's talk about numbers, let's talk about income. I know it sounds functional, but it gets it out of the way. Okay, we know where the numbers are at, we know how we're doing. But when both parties are operating independently, as it were, and I think the other thing for me too is when you get your downtime, now we've got the distraction of social media and screens and doom scrolling. And you think about our parents. My dad went out the door in the morning to work and he didn't come back. And if my mother didn't call him at work under an emergency, or a teacher didn't call him, he wouldn't see us for 8 hours. And then we'd all get back together and we'd have something to talk about. Whereas nowadays I can literally just leave the house and have a text message or a, hey, you didn't like my comment type thing. And I think a comedian made fun of that once. It's like we're constantly attached. We're never apart. Like we have an umbilical cord. And I think in a marriage that's tough because, yes, I agree, therapy can be maintenance, but also just being apart. So you come back, let me tell you about my day. Now, one of my frustrations was when I was working in London and commuting, an hour each way. And if I was lucky, the train had a seat and it wasn't rammed. And if I was lucky, it would leave on time. And, texting, I'm trying to make it back to bath time, or client meeting ran over or whatever.
Yeah.
And I would be writing all these notes to say, when I get a minute to speak to my wife, I'm going to tell her about, this character and this happened. And I was writing like a little script so I could remember my day, so that when we had time to talk, I could say, let me tell you about this. But most of the time she wasn't receptive because we both had to put the kids down and it was crazy and whatever. Fine. So I got all these piles of notes that we just never got to. And then time flew by and it's like we never got to talk, or if we did, it was like functional or quick. And I just want to watch a screen for a while. And again, that's not blaming anyone, because if I put myself in the opposite shoes, you're living in two different worlds. And when you're, how it is when you're in a high profile role, it's the mental tax is massive, and you come home and there's another mental tax, and there's no point at which it stops. You're going from one environment to another. Yeah, so I mean, it's tough, but I think if I could jump forward now, you've accepted the divorce, you've accepted the marriage is over, which is I guess would be different for men and women, or different for each partner. But then you have to tell the kids.
Yeah, and that's so tricky. It's so tricky because when you have kids and you're facing divorce, just having kids makes you second guess the decision to divorce. Just having kids makes you question everything 1,000 times over, look at it from different angles, and scenario plan. And then you kind of get mired in this kind of idea of, am I being selfish by, kind of basically recognizing my own unhappiness and discomfort and acting on it? Is that in and of itself a selfish move because I have 2 children to look after who would, by all accounts, benefit from being part of a 2-parent family, So yeah, I mean, telling the kids was, for us, it was, I think my one thing that I wanted to do is, I felt the need emotionally for everyone concerned to tell the kids when, at a point where I could attach a timeline to next moves.
Yeah.
That was key. And the second thing that was key for me was to tell the kids, for me and my ex, to tell the kids together.
Yeah.
So at the same time, unified front in the same room, and to keep everything factual, to say that, and also to keep it age related, to keep the information age related.
You clearly put a lot of thought into this.
Yeah, I did. I put a lot of thought into it. And it was funny because when I was talking to my ex about, we had the conversation, how are we going to tell the kids? And he said, he looked absolutely shocked. Like, you've really been thinking about this. You've really been considering how we're going to break this news. And it was almost like when I asked him that question, it dawned on him that this is really happening. We actually have to.
I will say, hands on heart, I know exactly what he's going through, because you think, even after you've said, okay, this is over, and you've started maybe even speaking to lawyers or mapping out your finances or whatever the next of which we'll come to, you still think, actually, there might be a... And I have heard of couples that go through it and get back together or stay together or whatever, and I don't judge any of them. I don't know what their circumstances are, but it's the kids. Their lives will be irreparably changed. And I've heard it said that that like we agreed between ourselves what we would say and toe the line and be amicable, and it wasn't a hostile split where we were throwing dishes across the room. But you have to sit there and go, my God, I've planned my whole life around this house, and I've engineered the finances with the accountant, and there's all this, I guess maybe it's a male perspective, there's all this engineering that has to be undone and ruined. And that, when we get into the financial discussion, you're ruining a financial springboard. And I know that's maybe the least emotional thing to think about, but then you think about, what is that money for school and for kids and for holidays, and all of that's gone. And so as a man, it was brutal. And I think when we sat down to tell our kids, we'd sort of talked about the broad strokes, but we didn't have a time, and we still don't have a time when we're going to move. At the time we're recording this, we're still living together after nearly a year, because we haven't sold the house. But you sit down and you go, is this my last Christmas in this house? Is it my last Easter? How do you make it count? How do you make it not count? But the magic's kind of gone. Yeah. Because the kids know that this is all going to change. And I think for me, it was brutal, because I just broke down. I couldn't control myself. And my eldest, interestingly, two completely different reactions. My eldest said he couldn't believe it, and said, I can't believe, because my parents are still together and my ex's parents are still together. I can't believe I won't have the two of you as grandparents, like grandma, granddad type thing. And that was rough, that his mind went to that continuity and said, in the future, I'm thinking of the future, and you're not going to be together like I'd pictured it. And that was brutal. And then my youngest went, we'll make it work. Like, he just seemed, I think he knew. I think the youngest knew that this was coming, and he almost seemed like, we'll make the best of it. Now, obviously, I don't know, inside the turmoil must be horrible. And over the past year, we've seen flare-ups, and I don't know what it's related to, but I'm assuming when you create that instability for your children. And it's interesting that you had firm dates, and I have a friend who went through it, and he said the same thing. As long as the routine was established, there was safety in that. But if there was no routine, and it was all an open-ended, don't know when, which is kind of what I'm in because of the real estate market, it's difficult.
Yeah, I think that's really tough. And I think what we had on our side is that we had already, between my ex and I, we'd already put the house on the market, had a buyer, and had a completion date on the house. So we were able to tell the two children, who were 5 and 8 at the time, maybe 4 and 8 at the time, that we as they knew, we were going to be moving. But we positioned it as, we're not going to be moving all together. Daddy's going to be going to live somewhere, and we are going to be living somewhere else. It means that we're separating. That's why we're moving to different houses. You'll stay most of the time with Mama, and then you'll see Daddy on the weekends. But we really boiled it down to, well, first of all, we said that we were unhappy, because I think they needed to know that we weren't a couple who argued in front of the children. We didn't have any crosswords with them. There was no visible signs of tension between us, obvious visible signs of tension between us. So to the kids, we were expecting it to come as a bit of a shock. So when we told them, we really kept the information quite top line and very relevant to them. So what the split in the family would mean for them. It would mean, for instance, that they have 2 bedrooms, one at Mama's house and one at Daddy's house, which they can decorate how they please. It would mean that they would have to change schools, but they would stay at their current school until the end of the term, which would be 8 weeks. It would mean that Daddy doesn't tuck them in at bedtime, but he does on the weekends. So we kept it very age appropriate for a 4-year-old and an 8-year-old, and we really talked about them. We sort of flipped the focus away from mama and daddy not going to be together anymore, to, well, what does it mean for you on an everyday basis as a 4-year-old and an 8-year-old? So I think that helped, because their thinking immediately went to, okay, so I'm going to be able to, what color am I going to paint my bedroom wall, and how big will my bedroom be, and what, they were able to kind of,
well, at least visualize a future, I guess.
Yeah,
and
I think it helped both children to be able to try and picture their lives post-separation. I mean, they weren't able to think that much about what their new school life might be.
Did both your kids have friends that had gone through divorce or were children of divorce? So did they have reference points from their friendship group? Because mine did. Mine
didn't have reference points in terms of friends coming from divorced families, and so they understood what it meant. They had seen TV programs of children whose parents didn't live in the same house, and so especially the eldest one, she understood what it meant, but the youngest one, I really don't think she had any idea. She was very me focused anyway, and so she was more interested in kind of, what does it mean to have 2 bedrooms, and does that mean I'll have 2 sets of toys, or will I have to take my toys on a Friday night over to Daddy's house, and how big will my toy suitcase have to be, because I'll have to take all of them to Daddy's house and not leave a single one. And that's the kind of...
So it was brand new to them. They had no contacts. They had no other friends that...
Not really, no. I can't think of other friends that they had at the time that came from single parent families, really.
Yeah.
Single parent households. Now they have a few friends, but even now most of their friends are from double parent families.
That's interesting, because in where I am at, there's a lot of divorces, and so there's a bit more of a...
Are they recent divorces?
5 years.
Yeah, that's recent, I would say.
Yeah, but they have reference points. So, but then they also have, they see families that are still together and go on holidays together, and every time we try to make plans with them, they're busy because they're out with their family, and it's tough, because we don't have that dynamic anymore. We're all in a holding pattern. And I think, just to, I guess, round off the emotional side of this, I suppose, how long did you and your ex, well, you had a fixed date, but how long did you guys live together post-divorce?
We lived together, well, our divorce didn't become final until 2 years after we actually separated physically, because we had the financial stuff to get through, which I know we're going to talk about. But post lodging of the divorce papers, shall we say, or petitioning for divorce, we lived together for 9 months in the same house.
So that must have been strained.
It was incredibly strained. It was incredible. I mean, we were fortunate enough to have such a large house that we were able to live on different floors. Yeah. So we were incredibly fortunate in that sense, in that we physically were able to sidestep each other. Not that we were acrimonious, but there's an underlying foul atmosphere because you're divorced, so it stands to reason. But yeah, 9 months.
Yeah. Well, I think that's probably enough on the emotional side before we start crying. Thank you for listening. To support SparkHub, please have a look at the show notes below this episode, or visit thesparkhub.com to sign up for our newsletter, which offers exclusive inside scoops. Just quickly, the music you're hearing is composed by Shi Hao Yan, and the audio engineering is done by Emily Chung. My name is Alan, and I hope that you dream big and something sparked in you today.